RAF Lancasters wing their way toward Dresden in a massive blow involving more than 800 heavy bombers. A new type of German scarecrow bomb explodes in midair, simulating a direct hit on a bomber. Pathfinder flares and incendiaries mark the immediate targets. Another scarecrow bomb. The attack is in support of Russian armies moving toward this rail center on a front 50 miles away. $2,650 tons of bombs are dropped during the night attack. 2 days later, AAF flying fortresses follow up with a second assault on this German communication center. 225 tons of explosives are aimed at what remains of the freight yards. Prior to the war, Dresden was a city of 625,000 population. The double blow is estimated to have virtually destroyed the entire city.
There has been speculation as to the number of people killed in the Allied firebombing of Dresden ever since it happened. On the 25th of February 1945, Goebbels' propaganda ministry claimed that 200,000 had been killed. There are those who have made up figures of as many as 500,000. These people who make these figures up are usually on the far right, who don't seem to realise how ridiculous it is to claim that 3/4 of the pre-war population of the city should have been killed in an air raid, particularly as this was a fortress city where refugees were denied the right to reside. Goebbels, of course, was noted for making things up. For example, at the very beginning of World War II, a number of ethnic Germans in Poland died when they were being moved from the border areas to the interior of the country at very short notice. Some were killed in bombardments, others died on the road, and some were murdered by Polish gangs. The number of ethnic Germans killed is around 2,000, none of whom, of course, would have been killed had the Nazis not attacked Poland in the first place. In the autumn of 1939, it was believed that some 5,000 had died, so Goebbels added an extra zero and then said all of them had been killed, rather murdered, in Bydgoszcz, then called Bromberg in German. This propaganda, effectively the equivalent of a modern conspiracy theory, was widely repeated and frequently used to encourage the murder of Poles. For example, we see in 1942 the wife of Rudolf Hoess, then the commandant of Auschwitz, saying that the Poles have to pay for the 50,000 Germans murdered in Bromberg. The effect of exaggerating the number of dead in the bombing was, I think, to encourage the murder of Allied air personnel. As with the killings of ethnic Germans, it needs to be remembered that Dresden would not have occurred had the Nazis not started the Second World War. However, it wasn't just Goebbels who repeated these numbers. The Swedish newspaper Svenska Morgonbladet estimated currently 100,000 dead on the 17th of February 1945 and stated that it was close to the 200,000 on the 27th of February 1945. However, this information came directly from the propaganda ministry and its press releases. No foreign journalists were allowed to leave Berlin by this time of the war, so the Swedish newspaper did not have the possibility of checking. It could just repeat what Goebbels said. This is Görlitz in eastern Germany. Goebbels was here on the 6th of March 1945 during a visit near to the front line. During this visit, he said that 40,000 deaths had been reported, and as a result, Hitler wanted to murder as many Allied air personnel. Goebbels omitted to say the source of this information. A final report from the commander of the Berlin Order Police stated on the 22nd of March 1945 that as of the 10th of March 1945 there were 18,375 killed, 2,212 seriously wounded, 13,718 lightly wounded. An order of the day issued on the 10th of March 1945 reported 20,204 bodies had been recovered and estimated that this number was likely to increase to 25,000. This document was discovered by Archive Director Heinz Boberak in the Federal Archives in Koblenz in 1966. In 1948, the International Committee of the Red Cross mentioned over 275,000 reported deaths in the Dresden area. However, once more this came from what Goebbels had stated, unverified information from Nazi authorities. In 1993, the files dealing with burials were examined in the Dresden City Archive. The communist regime could have done this at any time in its existence, but it didn't bother because it suited its propaganda to exaggerate the number of deaths. The city archivist, Friedrich Reichhardt, found that approximately 22,000 dead were buried by the 17th of April 1945. This is of course all-cause mortality, not just air raid victims. In 2004, the then mayor of Dresden, Ingold Rosberg, a member of the centre-right Free Democratic Party, FDP, commissioned an 11-member strong team of historians to establish a clearer figure to that of the estimates being given. The results were presented at Dresden's annual conference of historians some 4 years later. The results of the commission concluded that between 18,000 and 25,000 people died in Dresden from the air raid on the 13th to the 14th of February 1945. This was one of several raids, but this is the one that was being examined by the Commission. During this raid, which happened in 4 waves, 1,477.7 tons of high explosive and 1,181.6 tons of incendiaries hit the city, completely destroying the centre. Rolf Dieter Müller, the head of the commission, said that the group had studied burial records from 1945, carried out witness interviews and examined fire reports, as well as undertaking extensive ground searches of the city centre, which was destroyed. Further research has led to 20,100 people being named and a further 2,600 unknown dead as buried, although of course not all of the dead might have been killed in the bombing. As a result, the Commission corrected the minimum, but not the maximum, number of deaths in April 2010 to at least 22,700 and at most 25,000 people killed. Now, I will address the claim frequently made that Dresden was packed with refugees on the 13th or 14th of February 1945 and that these people may not have been named. How their bodies then disappeared, I cannot explain. It would make sense to assume that there were a lot of refugees on the road by this time, as the Red Army was deep inside Germany and the previous week had crossed the Oder River. So there would have been mass panic to escape. But were these people in Dresden? Witnesses do not report massive amounts of refugees. If the refugees were in the city, then they would have had to have been accommodated somewhere, but there's no record of this. I don't doubt that some refugees were housed in the military barracks. The barracks had a capacity of around 24,000 just after World War I, and in the circumstances of 1945 there could have been a lot more people there. However, the barracks were not touched by the bombing. Refugees logically would have clustered around places such as the railway station, as it offered water, toilets and a warm place to stay. But there's a limit to the amount of people who can stay in waiting rooms. Eyewitnesses have said that the waiting rooms were packed as always, but not that there were masses of people loitering in the nearby streets. There's no record of people living in the parks of the streets of the city in the winter of 1945. Furthermore, People from outside could only reside in Dresden and get a ration card if they had somewhere to live and a job to go to. This situation was made more difficult for newcomers in December 1944 when it was forbidden for them to take up residence for any reason at all. So, with no ration card and no food, what would the refugees have done? People would have received food from the local social services and charities whilst in transit, but only enough to keep them going. No doubt some people were put up by friends, but in the circumstances it would have been very difficult even to find friends and let them know. On the 1st of January 1945, the city was declared a defence area, one step down from the fortress cities. This was designated for cities with no defences, either real or imagined. Hitler sometimes pretended that cities did have fortifications and he declared them fortresses. However, the defence area was declared by Guderian, who was a bit more aware of military matters than Hitler was. For refugees, this would have made the situation even more difficult if they were thinking of staying in Dresden. Of course, some trains would have come into Dresden, maybe some would have stopped there, but why would people get off if they couldn't find housing and food, and they knew this? The only reason is because the train was not going any further. Is there any evidence for this? Well, I've spoken to people who were on refugee trains, and nearly always they will say that they'll stayed on the train until it stopped, and sometimes it could just stop in the middle of the field, and some at other times it may have been a town or a terminal station. Of course, if it just stopped in the middle of a field or something like that, whenever it ran out of fuel, then they would walk to the nearest town and then they would stay there or try to get assistance there. The aforementioned commission under Rolf Dieter Müller is adamant that there was no proof or serious indication that the death toll could have varied much more than 25,000 it has suggested. It also contested that there is no evidence that large numbers of people were burned without a trace on the nights of the 13th to 14th of February in shelters. This is in part based on the evidence of fire damage to the shelters, which was well documented at the time. This would mean that the deadliest attack on Germany in World War II was the raids on Hamburg. Furthermore, based on RAF estimates at the time, there was more damage to Bochum, Mainz, Hamburg, Kassel, Hagen, Düsseldorf, Mannheim, Bremen, Cologne, Dessau and Hanover as a percentage of the pre-war building stock of the city. As far as deaths are concerned, in terms of the percentage of the population killed, it's also quite small when compared to the bombing of Wielun in Poland, which happened in the opening hour of World War II on the 1st of September 1939, the destruction of an unarmed town by the Luftwaffe for absolutely no reason whatsoever. In summary, it needs to be said very clearly that even if the lower number of at least 22,700 is correct, then that is an absolutely appalling death toll. Hope you found that interesting. I upload every Friday at 2000 hours my time. I'm based in Germany and in Poland, and I sometimes upload on other days as well as doing live broadcasts. If this is the sort of thing you're interested in, then to know when I'm doing live broadcasts and uploading on other days, then you might like to subscribe. So for the moment, all the best from me. Thanks for listening.